to my colleagues in government, party leaders, district leaders, we're doing this, quite frankly, because you asked us to. And the reason why you asked us to is because you care about the future of our borough. It is more than just an election, and it is more than just checking your name off on the ballot. It is a vision that you hope to hear about people and they have for this beloved borough and this beloved city. And so I just want to thank you for inspiring me to inspire us to make sure that we do this. You're going to hear from incredible people in government who have all accomplished incredible things. I could go down the list, but you've all seen that they've been reelected, and they've been elected for a reason, because they've served their communities ably, incredibly, and with integrity and with dignity. And so you don't get to be in government by accident, and they're not here by accident. But they want to tell you what they're going to do as the next mayor of the great city of New York, and what I get to do is get out of the way and let a seasoned professional in Gary Axelbank, someone that we know, we love, and trust, ask these questions. Because it's just like picking a raffle in the community, you know, elected officials, we never want to do that. You're not going to moderate something amongst your friends. So I just want to say thank you so much for coming. Appreciate you. Look forward to hearing from you. And thanks, Gary.
I guess well-respected as long as I get his name right. Anyway, good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining us. We're expecting 2 more candidates who did say they were going to be late. And so when they join us, we'll give them an opportunity to introduce themselves. As just mentioned, my name is Gary Axelbank. I'm the host of Bronx Talk and the Bronx Buzz on BronxNet television, and BronxNet is here covering this event. It is being live streamed and then presumably available for people to see it and hear it later on. I just wanted to mention, for people who don't know, Bronx Talk, I've hosted the program for 30 years, which is incredible. I can't even imagine it. More than 14, thank you. And I've done that here at my alma mater, Lehman College, which is another thrill. President Delgado is here, so nice to see you, sir. Thank you for joining us. But more relevant than the 1,479 episodes of Bronx Talk that I have hosted is the fact that I have moderated, it's hard to believe, 96 political debates in the borough of the Bronx over the 30 years. I think all of the elected officials who are here have debated on the show, including the district attorney and all the other people. It's been an honor. But what really is important, you would think that by the time we get through this primary, I'll be over 100 of them. But we at BronxNet believe in voter literacy, and the importance of that, of course, especially for the people in this room and at this table, is very, very important, that the people of the Bronx in particular, and people all over New York City, and frankly all over New York State, get informed before they go into the ballot box. And that's why BronxNet is behind the Tech Equity Access Media Act. They call it AKA Team New York, legislation that will keep local media strong throughout the state, not only in the 5 boroughs. So please, especially elected officials, learn about it. Go to bronxnet.org and click Community Action so we can keep these vital programs going, not only in the Bronx, but all across New York State. It's just as important in Albany and Rochester and Buffalo and Schenectady and everywhere, and Kingston and everywhere else in the state, that we have local media that does things just like this. And that's what we're all about. We will hope everybody supports that, especially those who are going up to Albany. For tonight's program, we'll let each one of the candidates here, we'll let them introduce themselves. We'll give them 3 minutes to offer an opening statement, and let's keep to the time. And then I will ask questions. We took questions from the attendees and from elected officials. There were 46 questions submitted. We will not ask all 46 unless you want to be here till tomorrow morning. But I've gone through them and we've sorted them, and we will try to make them as relevant as possible. We'll simply go down the line. It's not a debate. You can if there's something is like, well, I agree, I don't want to say anything, then let's just move on. So let's just say I asked Mr. Lander a question. then he will answer first for 2 minutes, and then anybody else in any order wants to speak, just let me know, and we'll handle it very informally, and everybody will you be fair to each other. The objective here is information to find out who you are and what you're all about. And again, please no more than 2 minutes on each statement. So I guess without further ado, I'm going to get my timer. No, there was a timer going to be assigned. You're going to be the timer? Okay. So I'm going to give her a public statement. So just when you get to 30 seconds before 2 minutes, yell 30 seconds, and then time is up. Okay? So that way you'll know. And I will tell you, since I mentioned debates, I certainly would hope to host a debate here at Lehman College in the big theater next door as we get closer to primary day. But this is just a way of introducing everybody to everybody here in the borough of the Bronx. So we'll just start with you, Brad Lander. 3 minutes to introduce yourself.
Thank you, Gary. Thank you, Chair Bailey, and all the other Bronx elected officials and members of the county committee. It's an honor to be here. It's a special honor to be at Lehman College. My favorite New Yorker in the last 4 years is a young woman named Yaris Lopez, who graduated, and I got to come watch her graduation this spring. Yaris is Garifuna. She grew up in Honduras. The gangs tried to burn down her house. Once she got here, she faced homelessness and domestic violence and really scary things. But at the Bronx Family Justice Center, she got connected to a path that propelled her to graduate from the Bronx School of Law and Community Service as valedictorian. And in the spring, she graduated from Lehman College, and she's already working at New York Legal Assistance Group, helping the next generation of asylum seekers and immigrants find their way. So I'm honored to be here. I'm New York City Controller Brad Lander, and I'm running for mayor because too many Bronxites have been failed by our systems rather than the way that Yaris was helped by them. We have a mayor who promised to get stuff done but has not gotten the things done that matter to Bronx working families. Our neighborhoods are not safer, especially in the Bronx. The housing is more expensive than ever, and the Bronx gets left behind time and time again. 7 of the top 10 neighborhoods for evictions in the Bronx. We did an audit of COVID loans to small business. The Bronx was last. New York City government is failing to deliver a safer and more affordable city, and it's especially failing in the Bronx. I am running to deliver that safer, more affordable, more livable, and better run city. And I really want to underline better run. That's what I've been working and learning to do my whole career. So I spent 15 years before I ever got into government running 2 affordable housing and community development groups, one in Brooklyn, the Fifth Avenue Committee, and then the Pratt Center for Community Development citywide. And I'm proud of work we actually did in the Bronx, helping with the restoration of the Bronx River, tear down of the Sheridan Expressway, Starlight Park getting opened up. I've helped get things done that matter to working families. In the city council, legislation I authored made it so that fast food workers don't have erratic schedules, so Uber and Lyft drivers and deliveristas get a living wage, so freelancers don't get cheated out of the funds they've earned. And we created the Department of Consumer and Worker Protection to actually deliver for those folks. As controller, I rejected the Medicare Advantage contract when Eric Adams sent it to me. I rejected the DocGo contract because it was corrupt, stood up to the mayor time and time again, saved taxpayers hundreds of millions of dollars. As mayor, I'll end street homelessness for people with serious mental illness, focus like a laser on affordable housing, which is what I've been doing my whole career, expand access to childcare so every family can get it, and better run New York City so it can be safe and affordable for families in the Bronx. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Myrie, go right ahead.
Good evening. Yeah, wake up, baby, wake up. It is good to be back in the Bronx. Let me first thank Gary, a legend here in this borough. Thanks to Lehman College. I want to thank all my colleagues that I see in the room. I want to thank Chairman Bailey, DA Clark, Assemblymember Dinowitz, Senator Rivera, Majority Leader Farias. I saw Assemblymember Reyes walk in and Assemblymember Deis as well. My parents came to this country close to 50 years ago, and they came to Brooklyn when they got here. But like a lot of New York City families, things get complicated. My mom and my dad split when I was young, and my dad moved to the Bronx. He taught in PS 112 Bronxwood for 21 years and also taught at Sousa for 1.5 years. So I rode my bike on Baychester Avenue. I hooped at Sousa. I went to school on Fordham Road. I worked on Burnside. I took family trips at Orchard Beach. I went to cookouts in Pelham Bay. The Bronx mattered in my life. And it is time that we have a mayor that also says the Bronx matters, but not just in words and rhetoric, but in delivering real results. We have low home ownership rates, low life expectancy rates, but high crime. Where's the opportunity? Why hasn't City Hall delivered? That's the kind of mayor that I want to be. That's why our parents came here. That's why people come to this city, to be great, no matter what you look like, no matter what language you speak, you can come here and be great. That's the kind of city that I want to run, and one where the Bronx is at the top, where we are served, where we're given the resources that we need and not given excuses. So that's why we're talking about the things that matter to Bronxites: affordability and public safety. I have a plan for both of those things, and I know we're gonna get into some of that tonight. But you deserve a mayor that wakes up every single day and asks, how can I make the Bronx better? In me, you will have that mayor, and I hope to earn your support. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Stringer?
Good evening, everybody. It's great to be back in a community that I have spent a lot of time in. For those of you who don't know, my parents were longtime Bronx residents. Carlos Cuevas, my stepfather, was at one time the highest-ranking Bronx Latino appointed official, being deputy borough president of the Bronx. And my mom was very active in politics here. We grew up in Washington Heights. I went to high school at Kennedy. And I learned a lot at Kennedy and what it was like to access the Bronx, because kids who grew up in Washington Heights didn't go downtown. We went to Fordham Road. And what I learned at a very young age is that the pioneers who raised us in all of our communities were people who had their own struggles. They had trouble paying the rent. They didn't always have the job they wanted. In fact, a lot of people who raised us in the streets were the very people who said, I'm going to sacrifice my life for my child. I didn't appreciate that growing up, but I appreciate it now that I have two little kids, an 11-year-old and a now teenager, 13-year-old. These are not my grandchildren, frankly. They are my kids. And I believe that part of what government is about is to make sure that our children have a future. And I think the next mayor has to be somebody who is not afraid to stand up and say when things are wrong. And we love this city, but you know it's not right. You know that there are people who are not making it, but you also know it's not safe. You know that there's not childcare for the people who need to work and pay the rent. There's not enough affordable housing. When I was controller, I didn't do a drive-by, I audited NYCHA 19 times. When I was Manhattan Borough President, I demanded to know why there were 5,000 vacant units at NYCHA when we had a housing crisis. As controller, I stood up and took on the mayor every single day except Christmas, because that's the job. I didn't sleep through de Blasio. I broke ground. And then I said, we can do things with this office that nobody else has ever done. And that's why we attacked climate change and made sure that our children would have a better future by divesting $4 billion in fossil fuel. And that is why we divested, as controller, in the private prison industrial complex. It's why we divested from guns. I tell you this because experience and competence and strength is going to determine the future of this city. We know Eric didn't cut it, and we know Cuomo, this will be his last stand. You're going to have to decide, as the political leaders in this city, who's the best to lead in a way that will make you proud. I'm not a Bronx kid, but I'm from Washington Heights, and that's as good as what you got in this election. Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Ramos.
All right. Good evening. Buenas noches, everyone. My name is Jessica Ramos. I work as a state senator representing District 13 in Queens. I chair the Labor Committee in the New York State Senate. I'm a proud Labor Democrat who has been able to offer my service to the city, to the state now for the past 20 years. I started my career as a city council staffer during the Bloomberg administration. I left to work for several of our city's labor unions, and I was appointed to the de Blasio administration to round out our delivery of universal pre-K, and then later to to direct our Office of Community and Ethnic Media. And so I know how critical it is that we connect and communicate with every single corner of our 5 boroughs. I'm born and raised in the district that I represent, but I also have some relationship and a lot of love for the Bronx. Growing up, my aunt lived in Castle Hill with my Uncle Ruben, who was a retired MTA bus driver, a Boricua who worked really hard and really loved my Colombian aunt. They now live in BronxNet. And it's been an amazing life to see how the Bronx has changed and improved and continued to be this vibrant place where so many different working people can call it home. But we're struggling, and we talk a lot about in this race affordability. I haven't waited to run for mayor to tackle affordability. I am the senator who raised the minimum wage and pegged it to inflation. I'm the senator who wrote the prevailing wage law. I have fought wage theft through and through. I'm now fighting in the state Senate for us to revive the way we used to build low-income housing and modest equity home ownership opportunities like amalgamated houses, like Co-op City. This is how we make sure New Yorkers aren't just able to live here, but that we're also offered the opportunity to own a piece of our city because we deserve it, because we work really hard to be able to provide for our families. We want to make sure that our hospitals are fully resourced and staffed to not only take care of our physical health, but our mental health too. Our safety really encompasses a lot of things, and I'm looking forward to this conversation to make our case. Thank you.
Thank you. Candidates, I will ask a question. We'll start with you, Mr. Lander, and then each one can have a whack at it. And then for the next one, Mr. Myrie, and we'll go down that way. You might have heard that the President of the United States is a Republican. So his values might not be the same as some of your values. How are you going to deal with President Trump, and how open will you be, if you are elected, to working with the Trump administration?
I mean, let's be clear, this is a very frightening time for our country every day. The threatened freezing of federal funds, that's the money for our housing, for our education, for school lunches, for emergency response. Watching these ICE raids round up our neighbors, we need a mayor who will stand up for our values, and unfortunately, right now, we don't have it. That I have done time and time again. Last time I created Get Organized BK that mobilized thousands of Brooklyn residents to push back, and I will do the same now. But that said, we don't just need a mayor who's gonna stand up for our values, we need a mayor who's gonna live up to our values. The reason so many Bronxites and New York City residents shifted to voting for him is that the city is not delivering on safety and delivering on affordability. So it seems to me critical. I mean, look, when the ICE comes for New Yorkers, I'll put my own body on the line where I can to be in the way. I will make sure we uphold our sanctuary city laws. But I think the best things we can do are end street homelessness of people with serious mental illness and get affordable housing built and real homeownership opportunities for working class families and make the streets safer and deliver the 3K that we promised, because then New Yorkers will feel like, you know what, we are doing it here in a way that shows the values that New Yorkers have or what actually matter. And then when we stand up to Trump, we'll be doing it on strong New York City values. And I really think that's what we need, someone who is willing to fight back, who will work with the federal government because we must, but who is focused like a laser beam every day on making city government run better so our teachers and firefighters and cops know that this is a city they want to work for, not one that's trying to fire them like Donald Trump is.
Thank you.
First, let me see. I see we've been joined by Assemblymember Torres. We've been joined by Assemblymember Jackson. To want to shout them out. Look, I think New Yorkers expect their mayor to work with the president when it makes sense for New York and when it is in the best interest of New York City. But when our vulnerable populations are attacked and when the things that we care about are under attack, I think they expect the mayor to stand up. So when we saw a couple of days ago this proposed Medicaid freeze for reimbursements for hospitals, this is an issue that means a lot here in the Bronx. Safety net hospitals that rely on Medicaid reimbursements. A lot of us depend on this, and this is something that elected officials and leaders in this room have been fighting for. We got to stand up in those cases. We threatened food stamps. We got to stand up in those cases. He threatened support for law enforcement. We got to stand up in those cases. But where it makes sense, and it's in the best interest of New York City, I think there's an expectation for us to work. A lot of people have asked, oh, well, how could the shift have happened in the Bronx? And how could people have abandoned the Democratic Party and gone the other way? And I think it's because we have not been speaking to their issues. We have not been speaking to things that they care about every single day. How are you going to put food on the table? How are you going to give me economic opportunity? I don't want to hear about the labels. I want to hear about how you will improve my life every single day, and that's what I want to do as the next mayor.
Thank you very much, Mr. Stringer.
I was a city controller during Trump 1. And when that reality hit us, we didn't sit back. We actually went to work. I identified almost $7 billion in funding that would be jeopardized by a Trump administration. Couldn't imagine that at least we could control one part of the government. And now we're at Trump 2, and we really have the crisis at hand. But let's think about the kind of mayor we want in this moment. I think everyone agrees we will march, we will fight, we will lay our bodies on the floor, although I wouldn't do it in New York City because the rats are around. But I also think, and we got to clean up sanitation, but I think we need a bigger strategy here. And if I were fortunate to be mayor, the first thing I would do is sit down with the future Speaker in the House of Representatives, Hakeem Jeffries, sit down Majority Leader Schumer, because that's what we have to do. And we have to look at ways to mitigate the following years. And at the same time, we also have to do more with our state partners, our state senators, our elected officials, the people who will be the first line of defense for New York City, and that's our Democratic majorities. And then we have to identify once again where the funding could be cut, and then how do we make up that funding difference? How we look at programs and say, we're going to get hit for the next 2 years, but we also have a $3 billion reserve fund. We also can look at how to manage the budget. That's what I did in analyzing the budget with de Blasio for 8 years. And I think that we need somebody who is not just going to play to the crowd, that's easy, but also who's going to do the hard work with the budget, with the chess strategy in Washington, working with partners in Albany. And that's what I hope to do.
Thank you. Senator Ramos?
You know, we can't bend the knee to Donald Trump every instance that he throws some sort of new shenanigan in our face. We're going to get whiplash by the time we're done at the end of hopefully only 4 years of different changes in the law. And we started experiencing that just earlier this week when we heard that he was going to cut federal funding to all sorts of things that are really important for us in our daily lives. SNAP benefits, Head Start, Medicaid, all sorts of things that we know families who are on the brink of eviction, who depend on Section 8, families who are having trouble putting food on the table and depend on SNAP are really, really struggling to get by. At the same time, we have really big infrastructure challenges before us. I know that there are places in the Bronx that, like in Queens, get flooded every time there's rapid rainfall. And there are a lot of homeowners who end up with flooded basements, losing their boiler just a few months before winter starts. And FEMA doesn't step up to help like it's supposed to. And at the same time, we're gonna need federal funding in order to upgrade our sewage system and our water main system that's 200 years old. And we're gonna need their help for NYCHA, which is where a lot of the funding should have been coming from for a long time. We have a lot of climate resiliency work to do. This is a big area for opportunity, for job opportunities for us. This is why I invest so much of my time championing apprenticeship programs and opportunities for veterans with helmets to hard hats, because this is the future of our economy. We have to learn how to pick fights, and I'm not scared to pick a good fight when it's deserved. Thank you.
Thank you. I want to do a deep dive on this. So, Mr. Myrie, the question was something Mr. Lander brought up. Should there be changes in the notion of sanctuary city for New York City? And can you maintain that, if you are the mayor, in the face of a president who says, you know what, if you're a sanctuary city, we're going to...
All right, so let's be clear about something. Sanctuary city policy started under Mayor Koch and was continued by well-known liberal and progressive Rudolph Giuliani. This used to not be a partisan issue. It used to not be political. Why? Because we know how important our immigrant communities are to this city. I'm the son of 2 immigrants that came from Costa Rica, sent their son to public schools in this city. I was able to get a world-class education in our public schools, become a lawyer, work at one of the most prestigious law firms in the world, run for state senator, represent the very community I was born and raised in. That is a New York City story. And that is so many of our stories. So I plan to stand up for our sanctuary city laws so that our vulnerable New Yorkers can be protected. And this is not political. We gotta fight when it's important for us to step up and fight, and that's what I'd be doing as the mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Stringer, or anybody else want to weigh in on it? Yeah.
Look, I think that when you look at this issue and just put Trump aside, we've been having a crisis right here in New York City related to our migrants, our immigrants, and it started with a mayor who, rather than embrace people coming here, many fleeing persecution, he basically used the migrants, or the so-called migrant crisis, to blame them for a fake $10 billion budget deficit that wasn't true. He blamed them on Wednesdays, loved them on Tuesdays, and wanted to get them out on Mondays in the morning. And what started to happen was our very own mayor became the poster child for what was to come, Donald Trump. And the first thing we have to do, protecting our sanctuary city, is having a mayor that is going to use every tool in the toolbox to continue the great New York City tradition of welcoming everybody in our city. You know when I lost it? I lost it the night I was watching television, and our mayor walked in with a bunch of folks to a school gymnasium at 10 o'clock at night and called the work that we were doing for the migrants a success. Children in blankets with their single parents in a gymnasium in a public school, and he thought we were doing something good. We weren't. And we have to recognize that when people come to this city from all over the world, those children, some are going to be engineers, teachers. There's going to be a Pulitzer Prize winner. There may even be a mayor of New York City or a governor. And I think it starts local, because if we don't get our act together, we are not going to be one of the leading cities to take on Trump, racism, and all the things that are coming our way.
Thank you very much, Senator.
Thank you. You know, I'm the proud daughter of formerly undocumented immigrants from Colombia, and I never forget where I come from. In fact, just today we had some immigration raids in Corona, Queens, where the mayor held a town hall just last week declaring that he would protect immigrants. And yet, hey, how you doing? Saying that he would protect immigrants, and yet we had not heard from him at all over the past few days about preparing our city with guidance on what to do. I've had churches call me to ask what they should do should ICE arrive. Now that they're not only allowed to go into churches, they're also allowed to go into hospitals and schools. These are all supposed to be safe havens for human beings, a safe place from anybody and anything. And unfortunately, our city has now been left in a place that really takes on the mantra he started with. He had declared that immigrants were going to destroy the city. And he was the one who allowed that rhetoric to become true by not putting in systems in place in order to create entries into the economy and bring order to our street vending, making sure that street vendors are regulated by sanitation police and not the NYPD, because now civil summonses have become criminal summonses, and those criminal summonses have become breadcrumbs for ICE to come and find many of our neighbors, parents who are now struggling to figure out how they can find an adult to trust to fill out a power of attorney so that they have someone to leave their child if they're deported and they don't go into the foster care system. This is a serious situation that needs to be really accounted for. We need a mayor that's going to stand up for sanctuary cities and will cooperate when those do break the law.
Thank you, Mr. Lander.
So I told you a little at the beginning about Yaris Lopez, and I want to tell you a little more about her story now because I really think it's apt here. So she grew up in Honduras. When she was 10, gangs tried to burn down their house. Her mom scooped her up and they walked here. She wound up in the Bronx, homeless in a park. They took up with a guy. Her mom took up with a guy who became abusive. And one day when she was in middle school, she came home and found her mom unconscious. And she called 911. She got them to the Bronx Family Justice Center. And as a result of that, because those systems existed with the DA and New York Legal Assistance Center, she was then, they got an order of protection. They got her housing. They transferred her to this new high school where she graduated as valedictorian. She got into Lehman College, and now she's working as a paralegal, helping that next generation of asylum seekers. But you know what did that? Was the Bronx Family Justice Center and NYLAG and that New York City High School and Lehman College. But Mayor Adams cut funding to that high school, has cut $100 million from CUNY, and now is saying that he would erode the sanctuary city laws that made her feel comfortable that she could make a complaint and flee domestic violence without worrying about deportation. And that's why we have those laws, so people know if they've got to go to get away from an abuser, they can count on the city not to turn them over to ICE. So you better believe I'm going to stand up for our sanctuary city laws to protect people like Yaris, but it goes beyond that. It means putting the resources into CUNY and into our high schools and into the Bronx Family Justice Center and the public systems that make it possible for the next generation of New Yorkers to lead and thrive. And that's what I think New Yorkers want their mayor to do.
Thank you very much, candidates. I think I would be remiss. The majority leader of the city council is here. Nobody mentioned her. Amanda Farias is here. Wanted to make sure she was recognized. I saw them calling all the names out, and you were just sitting there, so I wanted to make sure you
Congressman Latimer is also here.
Oh, okay. There you go. That's right. Okay. Oh, they're all coming in, so maybe we should have a checklist or something. Nice to see you, Senator. We, as I said, 46 questions that were submitted. 8 of them were about housing, and 4 of them were about affordable housing. What a surprise. So I guess we're up to you, Mr. Stringer. With all the ongoing housing crisis, how will your administration, if you are elected, balance the need for affordable housing development while protecting current residents from displacement? If this isn't a core Bronx issue, I don't know what is.
Well, I've been a housing activist since my early 20s when I led the organization that was saving the greatest housing ever built, the Mitchell-Lama Housing Program, home to 400,000 people, 100,000 units. And I have never stopped since. And when I was in the state assembly, I was the legislator who voted against weakening the rent laws, took on the power establishment, and made it clear that people who built up our communities have to stay here through these programs. As mayor, on day one, I'm going to do what I started when I was controller. I identified 1,000 vacant lots that we, the people, own. These are not lots that anyone else owns, private developers. This is the people's lots, and we are going to give those lots to people who will build affordable low-income housing. Let me say it again, because we don't say it anymore. We say we build density, we're YIMBYs, we're YAMBYs, but we are people who care about low-income housing. When we give the land, we also have the ability to lower the rent. That's how Mitchell-Lama was born. That is what LaGuardia did as mayor with public housing when he went to Roosevelt, cried in the Oath of Office, built 2,100 buildings. I'm not going to cry in front of Donald Trump, don't worry about it. But we have the ability to build this program. The other thing we have to think about is how we access, and I mean access, the reality of what we're facing in terms of the loss of federal dollars. And the way to ensure that some stability is there is by making sure that we protect NYCHA. There's thousands of vacant apartments in NYCHA. Rehab them and rent them. We don't need the federal government to do that. We can do that right now. We should also actually go floor to roof and make sure that we are fixing those buildings, because if they collapse, we can't bring them back. As controller, think about this. In 8 years, I audited NYCHA 19 times. I drove the establishment crazy to make sure that tenants were protected. As mayor, I will not have to make anyone crazy. I will order them to fix NYCHA.
Thank you. Senator?
We need property tax reform. There are too many homeowners in working class communities who are paying more in property taxes than in more affluent communities. And the city of New York has long been simply out of compliance with the law. There aren't uniform property tax assessments being done by the Department of Finance. They still use rent stabilized apartments as the marker instead of market rate apartments. That's a problem and at the crux of our inequality and inaccessibility to home ownership in our city. It's also something that hinders us from building more low-income, more affordable housing. That is something that needs to be addressed, and that should allow more people, more unions, and more of our taxpayer dollars to be able to be leveraged in order to build the housing that we need. That's really important. We also need to keep homeowners home. We have a lot of homeowners who are now entering the retirement stage of their lives, who want to retire in place, who deserve to. But unfortunately, there are a lot of scammers out there there's deed theft going on, and it's increasingly difficult for aging homeowners to be able to take care of their homes. I think City Hall can step up with attorneys in the same way that we do for tenants, that we can do it for homeowners to make sure that they're protected and they are ready to fight for our homeowners, and in that way keep people in place. This is obviously a bigger encompassing conversation about NYCHA and about all of the different housing that we need. I think we should have a return to community development corporations who became a thing of the past, and really revive them as the community land trusts we need so that New Yorkers have a say in how we're building the housing. Thank you.
Thank you. I think we need to pass a microphone down here. Mr. Lander, there you go, affordable housing.
Thank you. For 15 years before I entered government, I ran 2 affordable housing nonprofits that created and renovated thousands of units of affordable housing, helped tenants organize to protect their rights. That's why I got in government to begin with. In the City Council, I passed a strong anti-harassment tenant act that protects tenants in exactly the neighborhoods where development is taking place. As I mentioned, 7 of the top 10 neighborhoods for eviction are in the Bronx. That's why in the City Council, I was proud to co-sponsor the right to counsel law. That means you're supposed to have a lawyer if you're a low-income New Yorker facing eviction. The Adams administration has completely failed to implement that law. As mayor, I will. As a council member, I led the largest affordable housing rezoning in the last 20 years in the city in my own neighborhood around the Gowanus Canal, where 8,000 new units of housing are rising, 3,000 of them affordable to working class and low-income families. And the community board voted for it overwhelmingly because we made growth work in the neighborhood while protecting tenants and winning a $200 million investment to renovate the public housing around the canal as well. One of the only places in the city that's getting a comprehensive modernization because of that rezoning. As controller, I've done the largest investments in affordable housing in the city's history. When Signature Bank failed, we saved the 35,000 rent-stabilized units that were at risk with an innovative investment from our office. $2 billion in social bonds. I want to tell you quickly about a program I'm going to put in place called Homes for City Workers, which will invest pension funds alongside city workers, teachers, cops, firefighters, nurses. So if you could afford a $300,000 mortgage, the pension fund will invest another $300,000. Now you could buy a $600,000 home, and when you sell it, you'll get half the proceeds. The pension funds get back half the proceeds. Without subsidy, we can make affordable home ownership possible for the next generation of city workers.
Thank you. Mr. Myrie, the last word on this.
Thank you. I launched my campaign with a bold housing plan called Rebuild NYC that included a plan to preserve 300,000 affordable units in this city. That included fully funding right to counsel, expanding it to homeowners, revitalizing NYCHA, and ensuring that we were putting city money into building permanent housing and not just building shelters. But let me talk to you about what I've already done. I worked with Assemblymember Jackson to pass a bill that would mandate NYCHA repairing and doing it in a timely fashion. I wrote the law criminalizing deed theft. Many Bronxites, their only source of wealth are their homes. And we've had scammers come in and steal it from right under their nose. And for years, people who were leading, who had the power to do something, didn't make this a crime. We wrote that law. We passed it. And now you have tools. The DA, who's sitting in the audience now, has already used that law to go after people who have taken advantage of homeowners here in the Bronx. And in 2019, after years of tenants not getting protections, I didn't just be a part of the movement to help pass the HSTPA, the Housing Stability and Tenant Protection Act. I helped lead it. And it was the strongest tenant protections that we've seen in this state in over half a century. So look at the record, examine what I've already done, and that's what I plan to do as the next mayor.
Thank you very much. Senator, I guess you're next. This is also right into the center of the core issue for Bronxites, and that's the notion of fair share. I opened up the Times one day, and I was pleased to see that some of the migrant shelters in Brooklyn and Queens were being closed. And I was like, well, that sounds like progress. Things are changing. It's an interesting thing. And then, of course, the small print in the Times was, oh, and by the way, there's a 2,200-bed shelter opening on Bruckner Boulevard in the Bronx. We've heard it before. We've heard it for years. What's your position regarding that? And then in general, fair share in the Bronx in particular, but in all our neighborhoods, how do we deal with the oversaturation of transitional housing and shelters so that there is fair share in New York City?
We've wasted a lot of taxpayer dollars in the shelter system. What we need is housing. We need permanent housing for people, whether it's supportive housing for those who are struggling with mental illness, so they have wraparound services, or if they're not struggling with mental health illness, really being able to offer them supportive housing with workforce development opportunities. You know, like my parents, a lot of these migrants came here because they want to work. They like to work. We have a great work ethic that is really striving to be able to achieve a level of quality of life for all of our families. I think that's actually something that we have in common. And what should have been transitional housing really became a permanent boondoggle for the past few years under this mayor. He put tents up over in Orchard Beach. Turns out it's a flood zone. He took them down. That alone cost hundreds of thousands of taxpayer dollars. And not to get into all of the other shelters and hercs and tents that he has put up and taken down. That has been very poorly thought through, a poor vision of how we can incorporate people who, by the way, many of whom didn't really intend to come to New York City. They were put on a bus by the governor of Texas, even if this wasn't their intended destination. And we could have actually created a system that provided for order. But now, and knowing, of course, that there's been a dip in population in New York City, we actually have had the opportunity to put the pedal to the metal and actually, accelerate the conversions of these office buildings in Manhattan and put people to work with a lot of the things I've already mentioned. That's how we get a fair share for every single borough, making sure that there are opportunities for our contractors and for our workers to get the workforce development they need so that we can make the money that we were promised.
Thank you, Mr. Lander.
In 1989, the city charter put in place what was supposed to be a fair share system to evaluate whether communities and boroughs were being treated fairly on everything from shelters to schools. Mayor Dinkins tried to start implementing that, but unfortunately, as soon as Giuliani came in, it just went down, and no mayor since has paid any attention to the city's fair share rules. When I was in the city council, I offered legislation that would fix that. Unfortunately, it got rejected by the then mayor. As controller, you can look at comptroller.nyc.gov. I put up a fair share analysis that shows you, yes, what you know already. The Bronx is oversaturated with shelters. You have more than your share of a whole range of things, of waste transfer stations, but not of the resources that you need. So I am committed as mayor to upholding that 1989 charter. You can look at what I've done as controller. I told you about those COVID loans, the way the Bronx was shortchanged. Look at the dashboards we have on the controller's website. You will be able to see that as mayor, I am living up to the city's fair share commitments. And that should mean putting the Bronx first rather than last, because this is the borough that deserves the most uplift, not the most evictions, not the most poverty, not the least COVID loans. On this one shelter, 2,200 bed shelters don't make sense anywhere. They don't make sense in the Bronx. They don't make sense on Hall Street in Brooklyn. They don't make sense at Floyd Bennett Field. You can't make those work well. I have constantly audited. So we got that DocGo contract rejected. $432 million no-bid emergency boondoggle, audited the staffing contracts, and I'm going to look into this one and see if there is anything we can do to make sure that what happened on Hall Street does not happen to you.
Thank you.
The Bronx deserves better. Period. The Bronx deserves better. Hasn't just been this administration. It's been the administration before that, and the administration before that, and the administration before that. Not investing in the Bronx, and instead using it in many instances as a dumping ground. We should reject this shelter, but we shouldn't just talk about this shelter. Why do we allow for gun violence to prevail here in this borough? An outsized amount across the city. We shouldn't accept that as a government. We should be putting in the resources that we know drive these things down. This should be the capital of opportunity, not of health disparities. We have a job to do as leaders in government right now to invest the resources in this borough. That's the kind of mayor that I want to be.
Thank you, Mr. Stringer.
I'm going to give you just some from my real life perspective as a longtime government official. When I became controller, I didn't like what I was hearing from people both within the shelter system and outside the shelter system. So I sent investigators in to go and take a look at the conditions in these shelters. And I was horrified, not so much on what was happening on the outside, but what was actually happening on the inside. These shelters were so dangerous. They were dangerous for children because we started to examining why kids were being put in dangerous conditions within these buildings. And nobody in city government gave a damn. And we kept going shelter to shelter to make sure that we expose this terrible inequity. When I went to the shelters myself late at night, I came to the conclusion one night at around midnight that I would rather be at Rikers, where I've also been voluntarily, and I realized just how much we needed to change the shelter system. And we have to. But I also recognize that we have to align community with the crisis. And as borough president and as controller, I went to district service cabinet meetings to discuss the challenges of shelters. Yes, we all want affordable housing. Yes, I have, I think, one of the best plans to build low-income housing. But the mayor has to understand the government relationship and the agencies with what's happening in real time. Sometimes you got to get off your ass and get into the community. And when you look at what's happening behind those doors, what you see is violence, unfairness, and that's what we also have to think about working with all the elected officials in this room who see this every day.
Thank you. Ms. Ramos?
The same question about fairness?
Oh, she started. All right, I lost my...
That's okay.
So there we go. All right. So then we're back to you. Let's just talk about opioids on 149th Street and 3rd Avenue. Several years ago, I had an office there, and I was shocked to see the syringes on the ground, see people falling out in the streets, and now the problem has gotten worse. And while that may be, frankly, ground zero for some places in the city for opioid use and abuse, it's still a problem.
Yeah.
How do we address it?
So I was literally there this afternoon doing a walk around with the 3rd Avenue bid, and Pedro was showing me the places where on Roberto Clemente Plaza, there's just open air drug use and still syringes around. This is a crisis in New York City and one we have got to do more about. I also went to the St. Anne's corner of harm reduction a couple of weeks ago because there are things that are working. So one thing they want is to have public safety ambassadors who can be out there first making sure that, when there are needle exchange programs, they're coming and making sure that they aren't winding up on the streets of the Bronx. But you also need a set of response programs to people who are out there that we simply don't have. So that's why I've offered a plan called Safer for All to end street homelessness for people with serious mental illness and respond to street crises like the ones that you're seeing at 3rd Avenue and 149th Street. And that plan would deploy folks in the case of crisis, when you do sometimes need to be able to do involuntary hospitalization, when you need to strengthen the mental health and drug treatment courts to get people off the street. But we also know that for folks who are homeless and mentally ill, what we ultimately have to do is connect them to stable housing, or they're just going to cycle from street to subway to hospital to jail and right back again. And this is working housing first in Salt Lake City, in Houston, in Denver. We can, in New York City, effectively end street homelessness for people with serious mental illness, and that'll strengthen our capacity to make our mental health courts work, our drug treatment courts work, to address the opioid crisis, to address the fentanyl crisis, and to make the city safer for everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. So I think that there are current needle cleanup programs in that area that need to be expanded. We need more social workers and EMTs to be working together in that area to ensure that people remain safe. But we have the chair of the Substance Use Committee with us, my colleague, Senator Fernandez, who has done a lot of work on the opioid settlement fund and why the funds have not been dispersed in the areas that need them the most. The Bronx, here again, has been shortchanged. Our Attorney General fought very hard to hold pharmaceutical companies accountable for the opioid crisis that they helped drive. We voted on the state level with Chair Rivera on having that disbursement make its way down to the city. And what have we seen? Complete mismanagement by City Hall on how that money is being given. So we need to demand more. There are resources that we should be using in this moment right now to help with this crisis, and that's what I'd be doing as mayor.
Thank you. Mr. Stringer?
Okay, I want to say to the legislators who are here tonight, I know how hard you have worked to make sure this funding gets to where it has to be. And I know firsthand as a former legislator how difficult this is, including the legislators who are here tonight. But look, I think the question for the next mayor is, what can you do? And for me, it's operationally, yes, money has to go to the people who need it, the resources for the people who need it the most, but also the mayor has leverage points. And as mayor, working with the next controller, we're going to go after these companies. And we're going to leverage the power of our $200 billion pension fund, our $114 billion budget, and we're going to start saying enough is enough. That you have an obligation to work for people who are struggling. People with addiction are good people who got in a very difficult circumstance. Many of us who grew up in neighborhoods know just how much drugs have ravaged communities. The kids I grew up with in the neighborhood, some of us got out, some of us didn't, and you can really trace the issues related to addiction, and that there was no one there to help our generation. That's why when I was controller, when we talked about cannabis equity and how we can bring money back into communities, I felt it because so many of the people I knew went away for a very long time because of misguided politics. The mayor has to lead on this as well.
Thank you.
I think we need to start by doing a better job of deploying sanitation, parks, MTA cleaners to clean up the mess when it's there. And I say that as a mom, I don't want my children to have to see what happens when adults are soothing the pain that they're going through. And as an adult, I understand that there are so many challenges right now, economic ones, mental health ones, that people are not making the best decisions in choosing how to soothe that pain. I believe in opioid crisis centers, and it's one of those difficult conversations to have because, of course, especially in our community boards, we have to make a case for where they should be located. Many people don't want them near them, but there has to be a place where there are professionals who are trained to actually help people get the services that they need. The NYPD is not trained to do this properly. It's why we need to upskill our EMS and EMT workers to really respond to those different types of emergencies. But again, we have to solve the quandary of, well, where do we take them to? Yes, there's the hospital, but there has to be a place where hopefully it's a supportive housing environment where they're getting all of the help that they need in order to overcome what's likely one of the biggest challenges in their lives and hopefully get their lives back on track. That's what we need. We want actual sustainable solutions, and we want a reversal of the harm that former Governor Cuomo did in closing our mental health institutions. They need to be reopened, they need to be restaffed, they need to be refurbished. We have to have places to take people who need help. It's not enough to just want to help them. We have to put our money where our mouth is and actually build out a mental health system where we haven't had one.
Candidates, thank you very much. We have another candidate who finally got here, and we're happy to see him. So we'll give you 3 minutes like we did with the others to introduce yourself.
Thank you very much. Good evening, everyone. My name is Zahran Mamdani. I am the state assembly person representing Astoria and Long Island City. And it is quite an experience to be back here at Lehman College because I went to high school just across the reservoir at Bronx Science. And I fondly remember being here many, many years ago. And it is lovely to be back here with you this evening. I apologize for joining midway through this debate. I am here tonight, and I am here every night of this campaign to speak about the same thing, which is that we have to make our city more affordable. And I am running to do exactly that. What we are seeing right now is a city where hundreds of thousands of people have left because they cannot afford housing. They cannot afford childcare. We know that from 2010 to 2019, the population of Black children and teenagers dropped by nearly 20% because of just how expensive this city is. If we don't take action, we are going to lose the city that we say that we love. And to do so, I am proposing 3 bold proposals. The first is to freeze the rent for every single rent-stabilized tenant across the city of New York, providing relief to more than 2 million New Yorkers who live in units that used to be bedrocks of economic stability, that under this administration have become the site of rent hike after rent hike after rent hike, the likes that we haven't seen since a Republican was in City Hall. The second is to build on the successes that we saw in a free bus pilot that I was proud to have led the fight alongside many of my incredible colleagues who are here, both across the Assembly and the State Senate, where we made one bus route free in each borough. Here in the Bronx, it was the BX18A, and we saw that ridership went up by 30%, assaults on bus drivers went down by 38.9%, and that we got the majority of new riders were New Yorkers who were making $28,000 or less, providing economic relief to the people who needed it most. And I'm running on a commitment to make that the case for every single bus route across New York City, making every bus free. And finally, expanding the promise that we've seen of universal childcare and making it a reality, taking the successes of universal pre-K, the glimpses we've seen in 3K, and making that true for every child from 6 weeks to 5 years. I believe that we have to do this because if we don't, we are going to continue to see working class New Yorkers leave this city and this state in the hopes of finding a place where their dollar can go that little bit further. So I want to say thank you for having me, in spite of my tardiness. Thank you for being a part in showcasing what the future can look like, because I know, especially with my colleagues that are here this evening, the successes that we are trying to build upon would not have been possible were it not for their work. And thank you for having me in the Bronx, especially where we see such a large percentage of tenants are living in those same rent-stabilized units where they deserve relief that they have been denied from this administration. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We will move on. I guess Mr. Myrie gets the next question, and then we'll put you in rotation with everybody. Let's talk about crime and safety. New York communities have general feelings of a lack of safety. What's your plan for criminal justice reform? And I'll ask tangentially, is the bail reform working?
Okay, so one, we released a public safety plan yesterday that has details on how we plan to keep the city safe. It includes a couple of things. One, something called Clear 100. I want to solve every single shooting in the city. Right now, we only solve 40% of our shootings, and communities feel that, particularly in places where gun violence is disproportionate. If you are a victim or a survivor of gun violence and you know that it's not going to get solved, that's going to make it challenging for you to work with law enforcement. And if you are someone that resolves to resolve conflict with a gun, you also know that the chances of you being held accountable are low. I want to change that. I want to restore our headcount for the NYPD to pre-pandemic levels, where we saw crime at its lowest in the city's history. I have a plan called Safe Streets, Safe Subways to ensure that we're pairing law enforcement with medical clinicians to help New Yorkers that are suffering on the trains and suffering on our streets, but also trying to keep us safe. I think we need a stronger CCRB, a Civilian Complaint Review Board that has oversight over the PD. They need the resources. We have a plan to do that. And I think we have to invest in the things we know prevent crime. That means more SYEP seats. My first job in the city was with YEP. That means expanding the Every Block Count program to much more precincts. When it comes to criminal legal reform, we have worked very, I think, hard on ensuring that our system is both fair and that it holds bad actors accountable. I think that there are things that we have gone back to change in order to continue to have the wheels of justice turn. And we're going to continue to examine those things as we have done every single year in the legislature.
Thank you, Mr. Stringer.
You know, when you're at a point where policing becomes a performance game and not a game and not something that's going to matter to people in our communities, I think we really need change. Here's what I'm not for. I'm not for police surges in the subway, and I'm not for putting the military below ground. I don't think people get safe, and it sends the wrong message. I think this is what we have to start tackling, and it starts with the overtime budget at the NYPD. Just a few years ago, we were paying between $650 and $800 million in overtime costs for the police. Today, it's ballooned to $1.3 billion. And what have we gotten for it? Felony assaults are up 20% more since 2019. This police strategy isn't working. And so we have to overhaul the department, and it really starts not with the person on the beat, but at the highest levels of the police department. Our current commissioner is spending more time rounding up criminals within the PD than actually dealing with criminal justice issues. So what I'm going to do is we're going to hire 3,000 more cops because we've been at the lowest level of policing in many years. And we're also going to, for the first time, align policing with the greatest mental health initiative this city will ever see. We can do this because the agencies are sitting there waiting for a call to action. It just takes will. And finally, we have to start addressing quality of life issues. We've got a lot of data from 911, from 311. I'll have a deputy mayor for quality control, quality stat, to finally deal with the issues New Yorkers are thinking about: sanitation, cracks on the sidewalk, businesses that are getting harassed. We can reform the way we govern in the city, and it starts with these programs.
Ms. Ramos.
Thank you. You know, I'm both someone who was stopped and frisked during the Bloomberg administration and someone who has benefited from a neighbor calling 911 when somebody was hurting me. I believe in the rule of law, and I believe no one is above the law. It's why I think the crux of our balance here in New York City is accountability, making sure that we are supporting our police officers to do the job that they need to do, but making sure that every time they do cross the line, that there are consequences for doing that. Right now, that is not the case. There are many police officers who, even if they just have desk duty, but were involved in a police shooting with other New Yorkers, are somehow still allowed to carry a badge. That is what causes a lot of the distrust that we have from the NYPD and with our public institutions in general. I want to be able to restore that by improving a lot of the training that the police has. For example, Eric Adams did away with crossfire training for police officers. It's the reason why the Sutter Avenue shooting on the subway in Brooklyn many months ago actually took place. There was an incident where a police officer chased someone who had jumped the turnstile and not only shot that person, but shot another police officer within close range. That is unacceptable. There has to be serious gun control training for our police officers. They need to be trained to be the professionals that we expect them to be, and we need accountability with a CCRB, and we need to turn those police scanners back on so we know what they're up to. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Mamdani.
Thank you. You know, in this moment, when many New Yorkers are speaking about feeling less safe than they had prior, the first place that comes to mind is often the subway, is often our public transit. And I think part of that speaks to the reality that there is more vacant space that we've ever seen before in our subway system. When I first moved to New York City at the age of 7, I was living in Morningside Heights, and I remember taking the 1 train to the 2 train to transfer at Times Square. and I would always walk past what was then a record store where they would be selling CDs, headphones. Today, if you go there, it's a vacant commercial unit. And that's the case at so many of our largest subway stations across the entire system. Vacant unit after vacant unit after vacant unit. And what I believe we need to do, and what I'm very excited to be proposing in the next month or so, is to create a new department within the city. A department that will create workers who are trained explicitly for the purpose of mental health outreach and homelessness, providing services to the New Yorkers that right now we are simply seeking to disappear as quickly as possible. And what we see is that this kind of an approach is successful. It's successful in places like Eugene, Olympia, Denver. We've seen it across the country, and what New Yorkers deserve is to see it right now. Because right now, our approach has been to task the police with a new responsibility every few months as we see more and more issues in our system. What we need to do is actually train people for whom that is their job, they deliver on it, and New Yorkers will feel safe as they see that sense of vibrancy return to the system that they often feel is abandoned.
Thank you, Mr. Lander.
On the subway and street mental health and homelessness crisis, we can end street homelessness for people with serious mental illness and make the city safer. And that does require some tweaks in the state legislation for more flexibility on involuntary hospitalization and some ability to strengthen our mental health courts. But at the center of it has to be this housing first model that uses housing plus services to connect people to stable housing. In the cities where they're doing it, it works 70 to 90% of the time. If we apply it here with diligence, we can end street homelessness for people with serious mental illness and make the city safer for everyone. On policing, we've got to reset the relationship between New York City and its police officers. It was damaged before. It got badly damaged during the pandemic. And then running one police plaza like a racket where the police commissioner runs an old style 19th century shakedown operation with his twin brother, that relationship is broken. But this is an opportunity for a reset. So I've been talking to folks at the Police Leadership Academy at the University of Chicago Crime Lab, led by Ken Corey, who was chief of department under Keishant Sewell and led a precinct in my district. And they've got a really diligent model for how you look at doing management training and leadership training in the precincts and up to the top of the department. That involves a partnership with all those community violence interrupter organizations that we're funding in exactly the neighborhoods that are seeing high percent of gun violence, but we don't have a good partnership between our precincts, our DAs, and our community violence interrupters. We've got to reinvent CompStat, which hasn't been updated in 20 years, to help communities focus on the outcomes they want. So whether it's retail theft or illegal weed shops or gun violence or felony assaults, we're using good data with good management, and then we can restore a relationship of trust and respect with our officers. That Home for City Workers program, I mean, they could buy homes in their neighborhoods, and we can rebuild that relationship of trust.
Let's move along. Mr. Stringer, you get the next question. I'll ask it in two ways, two different parts of it. Let's talk education. What is your stance on mayoral control of schools? Is it working? Is there a better system? And then the other part of it is academic equity. How do we make sure that some neighborhoods have good schools, other neighborhoods have schools that don't work so well? So it's kind of two-part, but let's just address your perspective on education and all of the candidates.
Look, I have two kids right now in the system. They go to public school. They're in middle school. And I've learned as sort of a late blooming parent that education is not free and it's not equal. It really is pay as you go. And this is what's unfair. Kids need help along the way. And though my kids are so perfect, they do everything so well, homework and everything, just like your kids. And that's not true.
About my kids, it is.
Yeah, exactly. So, you're next. Okay. So the difference as a parent, I'm lucky. If there's a mental health issue, if there's an issue where they need tutoring and they need help, thank God, I could put down a credit card. That is not true for most of the city, especially the parents who love their children just as much, but the thought that they could pay $250 or $500, it's out of reach. So we need to invest in a real way in every school. If there's a parent association that can raise $100,000, God bless you. Do more. But we must make up the difference in every single school, because that's where the tutors and the extracurricular activity comes from. Two things. We have got to invest in childcare. My tri-share childcare program is something we could talk about. We have to baseline 3K and pre-K, because that is equal education. And we must start thinking about, and I know Zellner's talked about this a lot, right? But we have to extend the school day to 4:30. That not only helps parents, working parents, mostly women, but it also helps the children, because that's when the extracurricular and the tutoring comes in. Mayors can do that. You know, that extra school program, people said, it's so expensive. How can you do it? It's $300 million in a $3.2 billion budget. I've watched these budgets. We can get there.
Ms. Ramos?
I'm a proud public school graduate and public school mom. My boys are in 6th and 8th grade. They're actually just the same age as Scott Stringer's kids. And I have to say, in talking to other parents, that I definitely feel like there is an appetite for parents, faculty, and even students to have a greater say in how our Department of Education is run. So I am open to having that conversation about mayoral control. I would definitely want to be able to appoint the school's chancellor, but we can have a lot more, many more ways to empower our SLTs and our PEPs in our schools so that they can help make our education system better. I think we need to, from the City Hall perspective, be able to offer everything from universal childcare through CUNY, making sure that people have access to education, because it's the great equalizer. And I would add GED access to that. There's a lot that we can do to help us build more community schools. It's a model that I really admire, so that we're not just serving the student as a student, but we're actually serving them beyond the classroom, and many times the whole family. We know that in some of the more struggling neighborhoods, putting in a washer and a dryer into the school actually helped with increasing attendance, because kids were able to come to school with clean clothes and feel proud of who they are. This is also why, of course, breakfast and lunch is important, and we need to continue to do that. Hopefully, more nutritious food and food that the kids want to eat, which is an issue, and we need to bring halal and kosher food into our classrooms. But I'm sick and tired of hearing that my kids come home having not eaten the entire day. We need to have more vocational opportunities in high school for kids who already know that they're not meant to be white-collar professionals. They're going to be blue-collar professionals. And there are amazing careers that are available for them. There's a lot to reform the way we do our education so that everybody has a fighting chance with a teacher in front of the classroom that looks like them.
Thank you very much. We saw that Michael Blake came in. Mr. Blake, no, what we'll do is finish this question, then we'll give you a few minutes to introduce yourself. Mr. Mamdani, then you're next on the education question.
Right now, we have the most segregated school system in America. And when I look at our system, I feel a deep sense of shame about that, and about the fact that 1 in 8 children are homeless. 1 in 8 public school children. And we need to tackle that on the first day of the next mayoral administration, and that's what I plan on doing. You know, here in the Bronx, I actually see the beginnings of what a solution could look like through the DOE's pilot program called Every Child and Family is Known. It's a program that has begun in the Bronx in a number of schools that connects children who live in shelters with a staff member at a public school that they have to meet once a day in person for a check-in. That staff member also has to meet the family of that child once a week in person for a check-in. And that face-to-face interaction, that commitment to the success of that student has had transformative results for that family, for that child, because without that, what we see is 1 in 8 children feeling as if they do not matter in our system at all. Additionally, as has been said by many of my colleagues, too often the investments that we see in our public school system are not spread equally. Too often we win record funding in Albany and we come back to find a mayoral administration that has just moved that money around. What we need to do is ensure that we are prioritizing ending that level of homelessness and that we are fulfilling a class size mandate from Albany where students can actually be taught by teachers in a classroom where there are far fewer children than what we have today. Because these are the elements that we can see to actually provide success in a school system that we are not finding it right now.
Thank you, Mr. Lander.
Let me tell you about what's probably the gutsiest thing I've done in my time in public office, which was to lead the effort to integrate the middle schools of District 15 in the school district that I used to represent in the city council. We were facing the kind of segregation that Zoran has talked about in the 11 middle schools there. Pretty diverse district, Park Slope, Red Hook, Sunset Park, and yet the middle schools didn't represent that diversity. I led the effort to change the process, and now we have dramatically desegregated those middle schools. The quality is high, and opportunity is shared equitably. I will take risks for a more equal education system, and you know I'll do it because I've done it in the past. I actually agree with everything that folks have said. I love early childhood education and community schools like PS 55 in the Bronx. But I think the most important thing for the mayor to do in the school system is focus on teachers, on recruitment, retention, and support for our teachers. We talk about New York's finest and New York's bravest and New York's strongest because we know it's not the police cars or the fire engines or the sanitation trucks that keep our neighborhoods safe and clean. And yet we talk as though the schools educate our kids and not the teachers. So my plan for education is New York's brightest, and it will focus on recruiting and retaining and supporting our teachers better. So I want free CUNY tuition for everybody who agrees to become a New York City public school teacher. And I want that Homes for City Workers program so teachers know they'll be able to buy a home here. And then I want to support mayoral focus through principals on teacher training and support and some time to work together with other teachers so they can show up for all our kids equally. We can deliver a school system that works for all our kids, just like it did for mine.
Hey, Mr. Murray.
I'm running for mayor. I support mayoral control. I want New Yorkers to have one person to hold accountable. The buck has to stop with me. They are voting for me to run the city. We should have a say on how the city schools run. Is it perfect? No. Are there things we can do to improve? Of course. Should there be more involvement from local control? Absolutely. I'm the son of a public school teacher. My dad taught between Baychester and Edenwall houses. He had to come out of his pocket to pay for supplies. That should never happen. Our teachers should be supported. I'm a public school student. In middle school, I had my math teacher scrap the curriculum to do specialized high school test preparation. We should have that available for all of our kids. So it's not a perfect system, but it is one where I think New Yorkers expect leadership. One of the things that I have already been leading on is universal after school. Every single kid should have access to after school program because it should not be dependent on what zip code you live in or how much money your PTA has. I'm the product of an after school program. My mom, like most New Yorkers, did not get off at 2:30 p.m., could not come pick me up after school, and I had a safe place to stay where I learned karate, learned a little bit of chess. I was the only boy on the step team. I might show y'all some of that a little later. But I was allowed to be a kid. It's a public safety tool. We know between the hours of 3 and 6 p.m., our kids are getting involved in things we don't want them to be involved in. So let's get this done. That's what I plan to do as the next mayor.
Thank you very much. Michael Blake, nice to see you, sir. Thank you for joining us. You can take 2 minutes and introduce yourself.
Well, good evening and apologies for the delay. There was a near car accident, so that's what delayed us here. Let me start by someone who's from the Bronx, born and raised. I went to PS 79 118 DeWitt Clinton High School. Not far from here on Lehman College in this degree. I went to Calvary United Methodist Church and is doing the work at Union Grove. You gave me the opportunity to be your assemblyman for 6 years in the South Bronx, and all for the elected officials. It's great to see you tonight. Why are we running? Because we have to change what's happening in the city. We are paying too much, we're getting back too little, and we deserve better. We can have universal child care in our city right now. When to the question around education, I said very clearly, every kid should be able to graduate from New York City schools with civics, financial literacy, and mental health. I'm the one that led the effort on My Brother's Keeper. We can go a step further. I was the chair of the Mitchell Lama subcommittee, and we should make it easier to have middle-class housing across the city, in particular here in the Bronx. When you think about what's happening in Concourse Village or in Co-op City, you need someone who's attentive to those degrees. People should have public safety and public housing all at the same time. You should also make sure that when we're thinking about what's going on in our subways, not saying to a police officer that they have to address a mental health concern. Let's actually have mental health professionals addressing that in the same way. We can change the game for the better for our communities if we do it in that regard. And so we are here because too often the Bronx is being asked to sit on the sidelines, and we don't deserve that any longer. We need to have someone that understands uniquely federal, state, and city experience. It's the reason why just on this today, I was the candidate that was endorsed by the Democratic municipal officials, where they recognize, despite there being current and former elected officials in the race, who is best prepared in this moment. We all understand here in the Bronx, in the last 10 days, where everything's been happening from Trump in DC, where we have to understand what's happening in our communities, who is best prepared on January 1st next year to lead our city with all the cuts that are coming and all the things that are changing. That is why we're running, because we deserve better, we deserve the best, and that's why I'm running for mayor. Thank you very much, Gary.
Thank you very much, Mr. Blake. Let's make all the answers now 1 minute, since we're coming near the end. We want to fit in as much as we can. Ms. Ramos, you get the next question. Parks funding has been controversial in many communities, especially in the borough of Parks, the borough of the Bronx. This year, Parks funding is down to 6%, despite the mayor's promise of making it 1% of the city's budget. Would you insist on a 1% baseline going to parks with no compromise on that? As the economy changes, all of a sudden, well, okay, we'll cut the parks budget. What do you think?
Well, you said it. He promised 1% of the budget dedicated to parks, and he has not delivered. I mean, he gets a lot of stuff done, but he doesn't get work done. And that's been a concern for all of us in all of these different topics that we're talking about today. To me, parks are a place where people should be able to go for recreation and for their own mental health. That's why they need to be safe 24 hours a day. We need more public restrooms in our parks, and we want our parks to be clean. It starts with hiring the right amount of park staff to keep them clean, to really make sure that our basketball hoops and all of our different athletic fields are in the right condition, so that we have more New Yorkers who are able to exercise and use our parks. 1% should be a baseline. And that's something that we should be able to deliver in our budget.
Thank you very much, Mr. Blake. Parks, in the borough of Parks especially.
We need more funding. It needs to go beyond just 1%. It's also for the parks and the community centers. I was that kid that spent time at St. James Park growing up as a kid. And too often we did not have enough funding, but also we didn't make sure we supported more of our kids with greater opportunities. It's the fundamental reason why I've said that you have to have nonprofit reimbursement change in the city, because it's not just running the parks, it's the nonprofits that are actually supporting the programming there as well. If you are consistently waiting to be paid, then you can't help support our communities in these parks as well. So we have to change what's happening. Lastly, when we think about the necessity of it, think about COVID. Think about the challenges when people are being told to sit inside all the time. But if you give people the opportunity to be outside, whether it be Van Cortlandt, whether it be St. James, whether it be St. Anne's, you give the opportunity to change in that regard. So it's not just about more funding, it's reimagining what's happening in our parks. We have to be able to show our kids in the Bronx in particular, you deserve to have quality on the outside, and that's what we'll do if you give us the chance.
Thank you, Mr. Mamdani.
It's hard to imagine who I would be if I hadn't had Harris Field, if I hadn't had the Reservoir when I was a high school student, because those are places that I got in shape. Those are places that I played soccer, that I played cricket. Those are places that I got a better understanding of myself. And so I want to make a commitment here, which is that absolutely my mayoral administration will allocate 1% for a parks budget, because what parks represent for so many New Yorkers is a break from the rest of their life. We saw during COVID just how important parks were, where it was the one place that New Yorkers could get out of confinement and find that there was still community that they could have. And I think that we need to deliver that. And as you say, this is the borough of parks. But at the same time, there are too many parts of the Bronx that are not actually in close proximity to a park. And we have to rectify that while still holding that title as one to be proud of.
Thank you.
I love parks so much. The Prospect Park is literally my favorite place on the planet, but I also want to be honest with you, and I don't like making promises I'm not going to be able to keep. 1% commitment would be $500 million more for funding, and we've got a whole set of really serious needs faced with the Trump administration facing us down, with housing affordability, with public safety. So I will increase funding to parks, but I'm not going to make you a promise I can't keep on 1%. You're going to know that every promise I do make to you, I can show you where the math works and where the numbers are coming from. But there's a lot we can do creatively. In that Gowanus rezoning, we dramatically increased park space around the Gowanus Canal without needing city resources to do it. I talked to you about Starlight Park and the work I did at the Pratt Center to help open up new park space in the Bronx through a creative community development plan, and I helped bring participatory budgeting to New York City, which we should be doing in our parks. So when that money is spent, you guys are the ones thinking, here are the projects that we should spend that money on.
Thank you.
Thank you. If you picked 10 random New Yorkers and asked them what the largest park in New York City is, what would most people say? Central. But where is the largest park? Right here in the Bronx, Pelham Bay. And I think we have to be clear about investing in the things that matter to the people of this borough. I commit to that 1%. We got to remember that during COVID, our parks were our only safe haven. When we had to keep distance from each other, we went out to the parks. It was Prospect Park for me. That's where I learned how to ride a bike. I grew up 2 blocks away from there. But that's what it is for so many New Yorkers. That's what it is for so many Bronxites. We got to invest.
Thank you, Mr. Stringer.
Look, I think we could get to 1%. You know, I've done the numbers in this city, and I am telling you, between capital dollars, operating dollars, we can get there. But you have to have the will to do it. It's nice for politicians to do the ribbon cutting when the new bathroom goes in, but then everybody goes away. And the people who end up suffering are not the people in Central Park, but it's the people in the Bronx, the people who do not have that reoccurring investment. Central Park is always going to be fine. Central Park Conservancy will always take care of business. I want to make sure that the next mayor takes care of business where there's no other investment. That's what we have to do. But also, let's not just stop, just look at our parks. I want to make sure that a dead-end street can be a park. I want to make sure that a pool can be on a dead-end street. I want to make sure that we start thinking differently about open space. And we've seen that when we close streets, but we can also invest for kids, and parks don't have to be the traditional park.
Thank you. Mr. Blake, you'll get the first crack at this. This will be the final question, folks, and we'll do 1 minute on each. Mr. Blake, what efforts will you take to protect our coastal communities, especially in the East Bronx, from the threat of climate change? And given the presumed disappearance of environmental justice funding from the federal government, what do you do to continue and accelerate the work to support all of our environmental issues, clean air, green spaces, the health impacts of pollution, et cetera?
We have to go further on what we did here in New York State when I was a co-sponsor of the Environmental Protection Act. And so what do you do with that? That means you not only clean the rivers, but you also make sure we have clean breathing air. We recognize that during COVID. We also understand that you have to go a step further. When we know funding is going to get cut here, in particular what happened with EPA and Lee Zeldin, that means you have to take money from the reserves that we have. We have $2 billion that's available in cash reserves so that we can have environmental protections. Why is that? Because if you can't breathe and you can't have clean water and you can't actually have clean opportunities, you can't live. And so the degree on how you actually fix this is taking the funding that's there. Going a step further, though, that means we actually have to take it a step further in terms of what's going on in East River, Bronx River, et cetera. Too often we are cleaning on the back end as opposed to proactively hiring young people to be able to clean on the front end. We have that opportunity. It should not just be going on during summer youth employment. We have to do that all of the time because it gives us a chance to actually have a cleaner environment in the Bronx and across the city.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mamdani.
We have a sewer system that was built for the rainfall that we received more than a century ago. It seems that every time we have anything close to an extreme weather event, we are drastically unprepared. And it is critically important for us to modernize our approach to this. And I say that as somebody who was representing Astoria and Long Island City during Hurricane Ida, where we saw just how it decimated the coastal communities where I represent. And I know that that is also the case across much of New York City. We have seen technology that has been explored, but in too minimal of an impact. And what I mean by that is cloudburst technology that we've seen the city pilot out, where you can have a basketball court with a style of pavement that can absorb water and then hold it for a few days before releasing it, so that we actually have time for a drainage system to catch up to all of this. I also think we have to pioneer every possible way to be environmentally friendly in this moment of a climate crisis. And one of the reasons I am so passionate about free buses is that it takes people out of private transit, puts them onto public transit,
Thank you.
and does so because it's convenient. Thank you.
Mr. Lander?
In the 1970s, when the Bronx was burning and neighborhoods were being abandoned, community development organizations grew up to bring them back and attract affordable housing resources back to their neighborhood. When Superstorm Sandy hit, something like that happened again when people showed up for resilience in their neighborhoods. We did a study 10 years later to show many of those groups were still around, fighting for the local changes that were needed to promote community resilience. And I want to reboot that model for the social resilience that we're going to need in the era of the climate crisis. And that means in the East Bronx and along the Bronx River. And then neighborhoods can identify, this is the block that floods. This is the place where we might need to look at options like retreat. These are the places that we can protect. I've also got a program called Public Solar NYC, which can put solar panels on the rooftops of 1 to 4 family homes all across the city with or without federal help. We're going to need new strategies for the era of the climate crisis, and it's going to look like that creativity we had out of the 70s.
Thank you.
We're going to have to first hold insurance companies accountable, because the climate crisis is not coming sometime in the future. It is here right now. And what we have seen on the West Coast with the tragic fires are insurance companies leaving the state, leaving homeowners holding the bag. And we cannot allow for that to happen in New York City. But we also need clarity in this moment where we have a federal administration that is going to be hostile towards us building resiliency. There is a state bill that we can pass that would make it very clear that our Department of Environmental Protection has the statutory power to build infrastructure to protect us from climate change, and that's something we're going to be working on in this legislative session.
Yeah, I remember Sandy almost as it was yesterday, and it devastated people's homes, their lives, and I was a new controller then, and I couldn't understand why people would come up to me and say, I'm trying to get reimbursed, I'm trying to get back into my home, and I keep going to the Build It Back program, and they're losing my paperwork. They're not giving me the answers I need. I'm practically homeless. I've lost all of my valuables. So I started doing hearings in every borough to listen to what people had to say. And I vowed, as long as I was controller and possibly mayor, that we will never put our people in harm's way again. We are actually asking for another storm. When we were bailing out people trying to get seniors out of NYCHA in Lower Manhattan, we realized too late that boilers in the basement flood and take out the lights. Water and copper, that don't mix.
Thank you very much. I guess the final word of the evening goes to you, Ms. Ramos.
Well, water's going to go wherever it wants to go. That's the problem with water. And I saw it during Hurricane Ida in my district. It's the reason why I've introduced a bill to do away with the bad faith loophole in order to make sure that homeowners can sue their insurance companies for not paying out their claims. I'm fighting very hard because I've seen the devastation to a family when that happens. And very little has been done since Hurricane Ida, much less Superstorm Sandy, to actually build the resiliency we need. We need to work with the Army Corps of Engineers to do dredging where it's needed, to build Yetis where they're needed. We need our flood maps to be accurate. We need to help New Yorkers out of the places where it's difficult to live now with climate change upon us. We need green jobs to be made available because we are going to need more plumbers and fitters and building trades workers to actually build the resiliency that we need. It's a great way to get our economy back on track and to save lives.
Thank you very much, one and all. How about a round of applause for our candidates? Zoran Mamdani, Scott Stringer, Jessica Ramos, Elnor Myrie, Brad Lander, and Michael Blake. We appreciate it. We want to thank.
Supposed to be.
Oh, there you go. That's right. Ariana, thank you so much. I know that Jamal Bailey, I got that right? Jamal Bailey, thank you, Chairman of the Bronx Democratic Party. For all people registered to vote, you should be registered to vote. If you're a Democrat, make sure you vote on primary day, June 24th. I guess we'll see you on TV. Good night.